Hey, storytellers, Mary Rose here. It's so nice to be here with you on Wednesday. It's 1 p.m. Pacific time. I'm live. I hope you are too. If you're not, I guess you wouldn't be watching. Hey, if you're watching on Facebook, let me switch the banner here. Would you do me a solid and go to streamyard.com/Facebook and give permission to show your name? This is a live stream. I love interacting with you all. And if you do what I just asked you to do, then Facebook will let me see who you are. And since you know who I am, it seems only fair, but that's up to you. It's just a little technical thing, part of the magic of live streaming on the internet. Well, hey, everyone, we've got a topic today that is it's so important. It's how you can set your story up for success before you even get to page one. And it's really important. And I'm going to give you a clue before we, dive in. It has to do with your main character. It's something that you really need to think through about your main character. And if you fail to do this, you may well find yourself having trouble later on in the first act, definitely in the second act, and maybe even in the ending, in the third act. It's just one of those problems that, if not solved when it should be solved, is going to ripple throughout your whole narrative. And so many writer problems, I think, can be attributed to this. I call it the need to establish the crack in the foundation. So that's what we're going to talk about today, the crack in the foundation. But ironically, this crack in the foundation is really the key to helping you build your story on solid ground. So that's what we're going to discuss today. Before we dive in, let me introduce myself. I'm Mary Rose Wood. I am an author. 14 published novels and counting. We've got some in the queue, but 14 of them have been published in my career, all from Big Five publishers. So I've been writing for a long time. And of course, fiction's not even the only thing that I've written. But I'm also the founder of Path of the Storyteller, which is where I train and mentor writers who want to level up. And one of the things that I do is go live on Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Pacific time so we can talk about story structure, writing craft, and importantly, the mindset of the working, thriving writer, which I think you probably all know that mindset is like the underpinning of success in any endeavor. And it is absolutely the case with being a writer. Right. So let me say hi to the folks who are here. I see comments piling up already. I love to see you all here live so we can get your questions and ideas and comments woven into our discussion. Hillary, it is a pleasure to have you here. Katie, I am very pleased to have you here. It's raining in Arizona. How interesting. Probably much needed, right? And it's a pleasure. Erin, wonderful to have you here. And absolutely hello. It's good to see you too. Facebook user, I don't know who you are because you didn't click that link, but it's okay. You can just be Facebook user today. I'll find out later who you were. I have no doubt. I'm glad to see you all here. Anyone who hasn't left a comment, I'm glad to see you here too. Anybody who's watching the replay, I'm extra glad to see you here. Please make sure you subscribe to the channel if you're watching on YouTube. That means a lot to me. It really helps the channel grow. All right, one more thing. I had this banner up before, and I just want to draw your attention to it. Especially because NaNoWriMo is just like a gleam in our eye right now, but it's coming up soon. And I know a lot of writers out there really enjoy the challenge of trying to draft something during the month of November. I think it's awesome, as long as you keep your sense of play and your sense of expectation like reality based. You're not going to write a masterpiece in 30 days, but you're going to get a lot of work done and you're going to have a lot of fun. I have made a freebie that is like so perfect to warm you up and prepare you to have the best NaNoWriMo ever. Let me put this banner up before we get started so you can make a note of it. It's a free download. It is a workbook. It's called Brainstorm Your Book in 30 Days. You don't have to do it in 30 days, but that's just a fun way of saying that there are actually 30 different writing prompts in this workbook. This is free. This is a present from me to you. And you can do those 30 writing prompts in order, and you will have, by the time you get to number 30, you will have brainstormed like the essential scenes and events and conflicts and concepts that you actually need to write a book. So if you do this before November, you are going to have a definite, like a different experience than you've ever had doing NaNoWriMo before. So please get over there. It's just www.pathofthestoryteller.com/challenge. I think some of the folks who are in the comments here today have already downloaded this. Some of you are working on it, right? If you like the writing prompts, let folks know. So you encourage them to download it. I think it's a really good freebie. Fantastic. Hey, Cynthia's here. Lovely to see you. Lovely to see you, Cynthia. I'm glad you came by. Okay. We're talking about the crack in the foundation now. This isn't a construction advice channel. This isn't like a channel about how to do masonry work. I would be maybe entitled to do that because that was part of what my grandfather did. And I have a feeling I'm going to, mention my grandfather at least once in today's talk. So I'm just planting a little clue. You got to hang out at least long enough to hear how I'm going to work my Italian grandpa into this talk. But when I say the crack in the foundation, I'm talking about something that I want you to establish, really, really think deeply about, that is true before your story even begins. And the minute I start talking about this, writers have a tendency, since you're also focused on the words, I know you are, to start imagining, what happens on page 1? But I'm talking about before page 1, before anything even happens. We have some storytelling work to do. Now, some of you're also clever. I know you've taken workshops. I know you've read all the writing craft books. Some of you are even now predicting she's going to talk about tragic flaw, or my character has to have a flaw, a character flaw, or something like that. And I'm going to address that in a minute. And maybe there are others of you out there, and let me know if I'm calling you out correctly, who are saying, well, everybody knows, Mary Rose, a story needs to start with a problem. Like a character with a problem. Nobody wants to read a story set in the land of the happy, nice people where nothing ever goes wrong. Well, listen, you're not wrong about that, but that's not really what I mean. Let's take those kind of misguided, well-intended, but misguided pieces of advice for writers apart for a second. A character flaw. If you've been taught that your main character has to have a flaw, chances are this is something that you heard in an English class in high school while your teacher was trying to get you to be excited about Greek tragedy. Did they succeed or fail? Who knows? But let me ask you a question, and I'm going to use some of my favorite examples today because I know how much you love it when I talk about Charlotte's Web and I talk about The Wizard of Oz, I talk about Harry Potter, I talk about Jane Eyre. I talk about them all the time for a reason. And I talk about them all the time because they're so different from each other. And I just want to remind everyone that story structure is story structure is story structure. It's not it's not a wheel you need to reinvent. And it doesn't particularly have to do with genre. It doesn't particularly have to do with whether something is a drama about adult relationships, or a kid's book about set in a magical landscape, or an animal story whose main character is a little piggy, or even an epic fantasy like The Hobbit, or a Technicolor movie, about a girl from Kansas. It sort of doesn't matter. These things just hold true. And I like things that hold true because they're principles. And that's what makes story structure a set of principles, not a paint by number exercise. So excuse me for getting on my little story structure soapbox for a minute there. But we're back to character flaw. Now, someone tell me, does Wilbur the pig in Charlotte's Web have a character flaw? What's wrong with Wilbur? He's just a pig. He's actually kind of a newborn pig at the beginning of the story. So I just don't think it's fair to say that, well, Wilbur has a character flaw, and that's why he has all these adventures. That's why he's the main character of a book. It's not really about character flaw. Yes, you could probably find some characters who are central figures in good books who have some, issue. They've got a character flaw. Ebenezer Scrooge, definitely, I think when we meet him, has a character flaw. But it's not universally true, and it's not what I mean by a crack in the foundation. I do agree with those of you who are saying, yes, well, that's why the character actually has a problem. It's not just a character flaw. They've got some kind of external difficulty. There's something that's going wrong, or it's gone wrong, or is about to go wrong. It's not that this isn't true. It's just that that's the first thing that happens in the story. Like the thing that goes wrong might be the first thing that happens in the story. I don't know. But we need to start our storytelling work before the first thing happens. And I want to be really crystal clear about why that's so. Stories are what? They're a mechanism for change. They are a beautiful pasta machine of transformation. Our main character, who I call the hero, goes in one end. The crank is turned, not by my Italian grandfather, by my Italian grandmother for sure. And I still have her pasta machine in my kitchen. But the crank is turned over and over and over again. Pressure is applied, right? You can substitute Play-Doh if you're not a pasta fan. If you're like want a gluten-free example, I'm all about that. But the crank is turned, pressure is applied, and what comes out the other side is different than what went in. It's change. It's about transformation. How does our hero get put in the pasta machine to begin with? Out of all the, I'm not going to take this example too far, but like of all the lumps of dough and, in all the kitchens in all the world, how did our hero get put in this particular pasta machine? This is what happens before page 1. How did this hero and this pasta machine like find each other? Why is a story necessary? And I'm going to slow down for a second here because this is, if you're taking notes, this is the first thing I want you to really, really make note of and think about. A hero who is just going about their life with no crack in the foundation. I'm going to define it in a minute. But no particular as like energetic issue magnetizing transformation toward them. If they don't have an urgent need for change, there is literally no reason for a story to begin. And so when you, the storyteller, create that first event, that first problem, or whatever it is that happens, you have to kind of drag in an artificial way, in a kind of a puppeteering kind of way, a manipulative way. You've got to drag your hero and the story together and try to get it started. It doesn't have its own magnetic force. It's not happening because of the story energy you've created. It's happening because you are moving pieces around the game board. Now, later on, the lack of intrinsic story energy in your starting move is gonna come back to haunt you. All right. And that's what I was talking about at the intro to this video, right? So what I want to do now is I want to talk about the crack in the foundation, what you can do as a storyteller to create a scenario, a circumstance, a premise, whatever word you want to use, before you make anything happen, before perhaps we even get to page 1, that contains not only the possibility of something happened, but the urgent need for something to happen. I call this the crack in the foundation. Now, why do I call it that? It's because it may look okay from the outside. There may be a whole house standing on it. There may be an edifice of a character's life standing upright. And unless we look closely, it may seem okay. It may seem like it's gonna be okay. It may not be evident what's wrong, but your job as a storyteller is to dig a little deeper than that. Something is wrong. This particular house has a crack in the foundation. If ignored, the thing is going to topple. And that's what I want you to start thinking about baking in, setting up in the very premise of your story. Now, I'm going to use a few examples and hopefully we'll get, some clarity about this. If you've got questions, please put them in the comments. I love to see them. Let's talk about Wilbur, my friend Wilbur. I love Charlotte's Web so much. It's such a little masterpiece of storytelling. So we don't meet Wilbur, Wilbur gets talked about on page 1, but we don't meet him on page 1. But we hear about him on page 1, and he is what? He is just a newborn pig. Like what's the crack in the foundation of Wilbur's circumstance? Well, I'll give you a few thoughts. Wilbur is a newborn pig, and he is the runt of the litter. So there's a big problem and kind of an existential dilemma from day one in Wilbur's life. In a scenario where a pig is born on a farm and one of them is a runt, the decision is made that he's not worth feeding. He's not worth keeping alive. And so something's going to happen as a consequence of that. And because E.B. White is such a masterful storyteller, that thing starts to happen in the very first line of page 1, which is, where's Papa going with that axe? He's off to get rid of Wilbur. He's not named Wilbur yet, but he's a runt pig. He doesn't have what it takes to actually even make it to the end of his first day of life in this particular setup. But there's more to Wilbur's existential dilemma, which is that this is a farm. He wasn't born as a pet pig. He's born on a farm. Even if he weren't a runt, he would be slaughtered at Christmas time. The spring pigs are slaughtered at Christmas time, and they're made into bacon, or they're the Christmas ham, or whatever it is. This is a farm. He's a pig on a farm. This is where he was born. So without any character flaw or without any bad thing happening to him, Wilbur is born into a kind of an existential crisis. There is a crack in the foundation of his very existence. All right. Now, this is a really clear example, so I hope it's making sense. If it's not, leave a question in the comments and I'll see if I can dig a little deeper. But everything that happens in Charlotte's Web concerns itself with Wilbur's mortality. And it arises directly from the fact that Wilbur's mortality is in jeopardy before the book even begins. Wilbur doesn't do anything to create this problem. Nobody else does anything to create this problem. It is the circumstance of his existence. And it has to be solved. And it must be solved. And so the entire storytelling, everything that happens regarding Wilbur has to do with his mortality. How is he going to survive? Now, if you want to get spiritual and thoughtful about it, you can quickly understand where E.B. White is going with this book and why it's such a masterpiece and why it holds up very well for adult readings, because don't we all enter this world with the exact same problem that Wilbur has? Its mortality is inherent. It is the existential dilemma. So it's a wonderful book. But the specificity of Wilbur's problem is crystal clear. Not only is he the runt, but he's also a pig on a farm, and that's the way we go. So that's the Charlotte's Web example. I'm going to throw another one at you. Let me use the Wizard of Oz in my next example. I'm a little distracted because I have a light on that's blinking a little bit. It might need a little TLC, but I've got another light on. So if you see blinking, it's not you. It's just my little light. Maybe it's a little hot today. So let's talk about the Wizard of Oz for a second. Now, many people will say, well, the Wizard of Oz, Dorothy's, this thing happens to her where she, the neighbor doesn't like the dog and wants to get rid of the dog. And that's what gets the story started. And it is truly like the first bad thing that happens, right? In a serious way in the plot. But let's talk about who Dorothy is before the story even starts. Does she have a character flaw? No, she doesn't have a character flaw. She's Judy Garland. She's amazing. She's beautiful and she can sing like a bird and, But she has an existential dilemma, which is, first of all, she's being raised by her aunt and uncle. So in true fairy tale style, the parents are missing. We don't know what happened to them, but we do know that she's a teenage girl who doesn't have parents, and she's being raised by family, but it just doesn't seem like a perfectly aligned situation because it doesn't really feel like a family. It's a working farm, and her aunt and uncle are farmers, and they've got some farm hands. And everyone is working really hard. They are super, super busy. And there is not another young person to be seen for miles around. There are no other teenagers. There are no other kids. She has no friends, and nobody has time to deal with that. Now, let's just pause for a second, because there are a lot of things we don't know about Dorothy Gale as portrayed in the film The Wizard of Oz. One of them is how long she's been an orphan. right? We don't exactly know how long it's been, but one gets the impression that this situation has been going on for a long time. It's not like it just started that morning. This is her life. She's terribly lonely. She's got this dog. Now, some of you may love Toto. I always thought Toto was a little bit of a, kind of a mop. Not the cutest dog in the world, but that's all she's got. It's literally all she's got. And if you look around her life, you can see why that's so important to the storytelling. She's so lonely, and she sings about it because it's a musical. And musicals are wonderful. They're like Shakespeare's soliloquies. They let characters tell us what's really going on. And because it's a movie and not a novel, the song kind of serves the purpose of the inner dialogue, like that inner life that we have talked about in other live streams. So we know how she feels. She not only can't she stand it anymore, she's so lonely, and she's actually wishes that she lived someplace else, So it's not a comfortable scenario. It's not workable. A teenager with not one other young person around. I mean, think about how awful that is. She's got all her hopes and dreams invested in this dog. So it's not a character flaw. And you might say, well, it's a series of problems, but it's not that something has happened. It's that her whole life is built in this way that's not sustainable. So now you see the logic of my phrase, the crack in the foundation, right? I'm going to bring in Anne's comment because she uses another phrase that I use in the Path of the Storyteller program. So thanks for mentioning this, Anne. Anne writes, so a crack in the foundation or a house of cards are the same as the vulnerability you've talked about, as the book in one sentence, right? That's a different exercise. We won't go down that rabbit hole right now. But the premise is a vulnerability of some sort. Well, let's not like limit it to a vulnerability, right? It's just something that's not working. It's something that we can see at a glance, and that is just not a sustainable situation. Okay. I think we can all agree that Dorothy's life, unless something changes, so now we're back to the pasta machine, right? Unless something changes, this truly unsatisfactory situation is just going to go on. It is what it is. Just as like Wilbur's situation, unless there's some intervention, unless something happens, his existential dilemma of meeting the farmer's axe on the first day of his life that's just it. That's the way it's going to go. Now, I want to talk about this word vulnerability that Anne just introduced into the discussion because it's really helpful. I'm going to use as my next example, little change of plan. I'm going to use Ebenezer Scrooge, another wonderful story with absolutely beautiful structure and a tremendous journey of transformation for the main character. I think we can all agree, right? Ebenezer Scrooge literally goes from being like the worst person in the world to the best person in the world in the course of a rather short novella. So Dickens holds the bar high for us, sets the bar high about how much transformation is actually warranted and possible, and perhaps we should be aiming for in a novel, never mind a novella. I mean, the book is really quite short. But the transformation is tremendous. Now, would you describe Ebenezer Scrooge at the beginning of A Christmas Carol as vulnerable? Right? I'm going to use Anne's word here. Is he vulnerable? Well, he's awful. He's cruel. He's heartless. He has no sympathy. He's completely obsessed with money. He's a miser. He won't even spend the money to let his poor employee have a little bit of coal for the stove, and it's Christmas Eve and it's freezing, and the poor man has got his mittens on and he's trying to do the books. I mean, he's just a terrible person. So most of us would not say, oh, that Ebenezer Scrooge, he's so vulnerable. Now, listen, nowadays we're all very sensitive and we're all like, oh, hurt people. That's Ebenezer Scrooge. Clearly there's a wound in there. Hie thee to a therapist. Like we might be curious to psychologize Ebenezer Scrooge, and we wouldn't be necessarily wrong to do so. But let's just deal with him as a fictional construction, because that's what we're in the business of creating, right? We're in the business of inventing characters and inventing stories. His situation at the beginning of A Christmas Carol is It's so extreme and it's so clearly presented. And it's presented in such contrast to the world around him. And I will give you a little refresher because it's been a while since last Christmas. So I'm just going to assume not everyone has read A Christmas Carol within the last 2 weeks. And the opening of A Christmas Carol establishes what kind of person Ebenezer Scrooge is, but it also contrasts him instantly with a group of businessmen who are going around asking for charitable donations for the poor. Like, that's the first thing. Like, this is one of the first things that happens. And one of the other first things that happens in A Christmas Carol is that Scrooge's nephew, who's a very sweet young man with a wife and children, comes to invite his uncle to have Christmas Eve dinner with the family. And of course, Ebenezer Scrooge says, "No, bah, humbug. I don't want to be around Christmas. I'm not going to hang with you people," you know. And his nephew was like, "Come on, uncle, don't be that way." So the contrast between the kind of person that our hero, he truly is the hero of the book, the contrast between the person that he is at the beginning and the expectations, the norms, the possibilities that are um, valued in his world, in his environment, could not be clearer. Dickens lays it out like a map. And so what? Our readers are smart. Dickens' readers were smart. Our readers are sensitive, and they are fluent in the art of storytelling. Never forget that. So if you have a character who's not vulnerable, but who's in a circumstance of such spiritual decay, let's call it, that we can see at a glance that he cannot go on like this. It's not working. It's terrible. The world around him judges it. It's alienated him from his family, who still have the doors open to him. It puts him in conflict with his peers. It's just not, he can't stay this way forever. Change is really necessary. If something doesn't change quickly, this is, I mean, it's just awful. So we bring to a story like that, as readers, our own sensitivity to the fact that this is not a house that's built on a reasonable foundation. It's got a crack in it. We know right away, we can intuit instantly what needs to change here. Does Ebenezer Scrooge know what needs to change? No. Does he even think he has a problem? I'm going to say no. And so you might argue that he's got a flaw, but he doesn't think he does. He doesn't think he does. What he's existing in is a kind of a circumstance that cannot sustain. So I hope that helps clarify why the word vulnerability is not exactly what what I want to say, because it might not come across as vulnerability. Yes, Dorothy Gale is vulnerable, Wilbur's vulnerable, Ebenezer Scrooge isn't. They're all equally heroes of stories. So I'm trying to dig like sort of down deeper to the principles here, not just to describe how a particular character is unsustainable, but how all characters, especially the ones that you invent, my friends, and that's really what we're talking about here, need to have this quality of being unsustainable before you allow the story to begin. Let me just do a couple of quick examples because we spent time on those. Talked about Charlotte's Web. We talked about The Wizard of Oz. Now we've talked about Christmas Carol. I'll just throw in just a couple of quick minutes about Harry Potter. Now, anyone who knows the kind of overall plot of Harry Potter knows that he's a very special wizard. He doesn't know it at the beginning of the book, but he very quickly discovers it and gets sent off to magic school where he's got to do battle with evil. So that's what the sort of the whole plot in a single line is about. But before any of that happens, before the storytelling begins, who is he? He's a kid who's just about to turn 11. His parents are dead. He's being raised by his aunt and uncle, and they don't like him. And they've got him living under the stairs, and they're very unkind to him. And, you know, the kids are unkind. The aunt and uncle are unkind. He's a suffering, lonely child. He doesn't sing over the rainbow because it's a novel and not a movie musical. But it's sort of the same setup. He's just really mistreated. And he does not know the truth of himself. which is what? Which is that he is actually kind of a powerful wizard, and that his parents were killed because that, they had magic, and so there's backstory there that creates an unsustainable situation for him that he doesn't even know about yet. But the stuff that is offered to the reader right away is a situation that is unsustainable. He can't go on like this. This is no good. And so anytime you really capture that quality of inventing a circumstance for a hero that has that real crack in the foundation, whether they can see it or not, whether they think they have a problem or not, whether they're coping bravely and hiding their loneliness like Dorothy Gale, or whether they're sad and pouting like Harry Potter, or whether they're oblivious to the whole situation like Wilbur, who's just a newborn pig, right? Or whether they're in a kind of a spiritual state like Ebenezer Scrooge, where they don't even think they're the ones with the problem. Oh, and I think it's time now to mention my Italian grandfather. If we're going to give my grandma like a shout out for her pasta machine, my Italian grandpa was a pretty rough character. And he was like, many men of that generation and, cultural background. He said what was on his mind. He was not concerned with other people's feelings. He was very healthy. He was never sick. He lived to be 96. And as my mother often said, he doesn't have high blood pressure because he gives high blood pressure to everybody who has to deal with him. So that's Ebenezer Scrooge. It's like that the character themselves may not realize that they're the ones in need of transformation, but the larger kind of consciousness of the story does. All right, that's what a crack in the foundation is. Now, why do we have to have one? And what happens if we don't? We have to have a crack in the foundation to magnetize the story to the main character, and to let you as a writer design a story that rises from this very specificity. This is what the transformation is going to be about. The seeds of it are planted before the reader even cracks open the book. And it's going to be generating story energy from page 1 to the last page. And if you think about the issues kind of embedded in all of the examples that I talked about, you're going to see that that's very much the case. Whether it's the spiritual transformation of Ebenezer Scrooge, or it's Dorothy's need to have a realignment of her family life. It's literally the closing scene of the movie is her back at home with everyone in the family staring at her. She's finally the center of attention. Wilbur's encounter with his own mortality, his exploration of mortality ends with him not only being saved personally, but becoming kind of a parent figure for generations that are ongoing. And we start to see that, it sort of doesn't matter whether Wilbur himself lives forever, because he can't and none of us can. But he is now part of a lineage of generations. He's part of the line that's going to move forward. Beautiful wisdom from E.B. White. It chokes me up every time. The seed that you plant in this unsustainable world, this crack in the foundation, this house of cards, as Anne said, this thing that's sort of just ripe to topple, is going to be where you end up on the last page. I'm telling you, it's going to be where you end up. So if you don't do it, what happens? If you don't really put your main character in this kind of fully imagined circumstance, what happens? You are going to want to start a story, and you're going to do what I described a little earlier, which is you're going to make some event happen to a main character who really has no urgent need for change. And you are going to find that as you write your story, or try to, if you don't bake into the original premise this deep need for meaningful, urgent change, every time you have to make the next thing happen in the story, it's going to be like, moving a sofa. It's going to take all your strength. It's going to take so much pushing. You're going to have to force things to happen. They're not going to happen in a way that seems like storytelling. It's going to be you like, white knuckling your way through the story. Something else has to happen, and something else has to happen, and something else has to happen. But the story itself is not generating the story energy to give the momentum of that transformation someplace to go. Now, anybody who's struggled with writing a draft, gotten a little soggy in the middle, gotten a little bit lost, not sure what happens next. Did I just describe what it feels like or not? I did, right? This is exactly what it feels like. And so you can run, but you cannot hide from a failure to really imagine this unsustainable world, this crack in the foundation that's like at the core of your hero's existence. And if you do it and you let the story rise from that, you're going to be in much better shape, not just on page 1, but on every single page of your draft as you work your way through the book. So I hope I've convinced you to do a little bit more thinking about who your hero is before anything happens, and to really make sure that they've got enough within them, within that original circumstance, to energize an entire story, because that's basically what you're doing, right? That's basically what you're doing. I'm going to just do a quick check to see if we've got any questions. I see a little bit more from Anne, but I think we've already discussed. Okay, terrific. So let's think about what prevents us from doing that. What might prevent us from doing that sort of deep exploration of character? I think one of the first things that prevents us from doing it is that we're so eager to start writing. We're just so eager to start writing. We don't yet know who we're writing about, but we want to get to work, and we have been convinced, or we've convinced ourselves, that getting to work as a writer means putting words on pages. Now, obviously, working as a writer includes putting words on pages, but I do continue to encourage you to really think of yourself as a storyteller who writes down your stories. And yes, call yourself a writer, absolutely. But don't think that putting words on pages is going to accidentally create the story energy that you need to actually draft a novel. It's not. It's unlikely to. And this is a dilemma that many writers discover the hard way, because they do white knuckle their way through drafts that are like pushing a million sofas into a million different positions, and then they get to the end, and the question of like, well, who is the main character? What was the transformation? What was this story actually about anyway? What transformation was wrought? Remain unanswered. 300 pages in, and the sort of core questions remain unanswered. So I really want you to save yourself a little time and do the work of imagining what's going on in your main character's life, not just on a day, not just in a week, but how it's been going. How has it been going for a while that is unsustainable? So that's one reason we might make this mistake, is we're just so eager to start writing. And I think the other reason, and I'll keep it to 2 unless anybody wants to pop in some of your own. I think the other reason that writers are prone to make this mistake, to kind of skip over this, is that we can become self-conscious about creating what feels like drama, for lack of a better word, what feels like a lot of drama for our main characters. We think that we should start from a neutral position because it's unostentatious, it's not melodramatic, and so we create characters who are just kind of ordinary. They're not that out of the ordinary. They might have a little bit of something that bugs them, but we fool ourselves into thinking that that's enough, and then we'll just make something happen to them that'll just be bad, and then they'll have to deal with it. But why would the storytelling gods bestow a story on a character whose need for change was neither significant nor urgent? They wouldn't bother. They've got other fish to fry, you know. So it's your job to really be willing to invent the difficulty. And as I was just saying, I think a lot of us think of difficulty as being like, oh, but that's so much. That's so much difficulty. So are you saying that, Wilbur is a pig on a farm and he's going to be killed, and that's not enough, so we also have to make him the runt? Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. Make it more. Are you saying, that Harry Potter, well, it's bad enough that his parents were killed by an evil wizard and you know, he's got to live in this family that's unkind to him. But does he really have to also live under the stairs? Isn't that too much? Like, no, it's not too much. So I exhort you to let go of any self-consciousness you might have, or kind of be kind to the people in your life. But it's ill-advised to be kind to the hero of your book, right? That's not your job. Your job is to create the situation that's got the crack in the foundation that is so fully imagined. It's so bad, that the story cannot help but say, that one, we're coming for Dorothy Gale right now. We're going to get that kid a story. We're going to change her life, and it's all going to be better, right? So think of it as just a way of attracting the storytelling energies to them. And if you succeed in that, you're going to have so much good stuff to work with all the way through your narrative. And I'm just sort of looking here, and I'm curious if anybody has that feeling of like, I understand that I'm supposed to create difficulty, but I just feel like I don't want to be so hard on my main character. Why does so many things have to be wrong in her life or his life? Why does such a heap of difficulty have to be there? Why does Ebenezer Scrooge have to be so awful? If that's your take, if that's the way you think about it, you've got to take a deep breath and flip the switch, because you need to start thinking not just differently, but the opposite of what you're thinking. You really got to go into the other zone of understanding that unless your main character is just in such desperate need of transformation, they're not going to get it. They're just not going to get it. And you as a storyteller might say, well, I'm going to force things to happen. But believe me, when you get to the middle of the second act and your arms are tired and you just cannot push another sofa into place, you're going to say, wait a minute, why am I doing this all alone? Why aren't the storytelling gods helping me? Like, why isn't the story energy of this premise that I came up with continuing to deliver the goods for me? I'm not saying it's not work, but there's a real difference in the experience of writing a story that is based on a lackluster, insufficient premise. It's ultimately not going to work. You can force yourself to get through a draft, but it's ultimately not going to work. It's just going to be very thin gruel. It's going to be very flat, and it's not going to be the book that helps you break out. It's not going to be the one that people say, wow, this is it. The sooner you can get yourself to write a book based on this kind of premise, as all of these great stories are, the sooner you're going to write something that people are going to say, that works. The magic longed for words. This one really works. That's what we want to get to. I'm going to bring up a comment from Nancy. Such an interesting word you use, Nancy. You say it feels crushing to create such difficulties for the main character, and melodramatic. Crushing and melodramatic, right? It does. It does. Now, how do we grapple with that as writers? If we have somehow, gotten it in our heads that it's crushing and melodramatic to create difficulties for the main character, and yet we choose to write fiction, which is what? Starting with the character in an absolutely unsustainable situation, toppling the house of cards that they already live in. So we make things worse. And then we send them on an adventure where they've got a high stakes mission to pursue. And then scene after scene after scene, we fill up their path with obstacles. That is literally our job. How do we embrace the necessity of grappling with all of that struggle in our work when we resist struggle in real life? This is a really good question. This is a really good question. I think I'll wrap up by offering one way to think about it that you might find encouraging, which is that what's the purpose of the story anyway? For whose benefit is it? Well, it's for your reader's benefit. And what I want you to consider is not how it feels for you as the writer to really look at your main character, your hero, with this kind of merciless gaze and say, all right, this is your circumstance. How can I make it a little worse? How can I make this even a little shakier, a little more evident to the reader that this is a situation that cannot last? And then invent all the obstacles and strew them in the hero's path. That's your job. But the reader is going to take that ride in order to get to how you feel when you get to the end of A Christmas Carol. When Ebenezer Scrooge changes his ways and wakes up on Christmas morning crowing with laughter and joy and having the giant goose sent to Tiny Tim's house and reuniting with his nephew. And I mean, you can't get to that moment unless you earn that transformation. And if you think about it that way, Nancy and anyone else who might say, yeah, I'm a little squeamish about really thinking through how much difficulty I have to grapple with in order to write a good story. I just want you to remember why you're doing it. It's because you're creating, we're back to Greek tragedy, you're creating that catharsis for your reader. You're creating the moment where they can go, yay, Ebenezer Scrooge is fine. Yay, Wilbur's going to live, but also I have a little tear in my eye because Wilbur can't live forever and nobody can, but Charlotte's babies are going to live forever and it's all going to be great. Like that moment of like this beautiful energetic release of a transformation achieved is the experience that we're trying to give our reader. And it is the most positive experience. It's a tremendously beneficial experience. And it's one of the reasons that people love stories. That transformation has to be earned. Beauty and the Beast, Belle's got to go to that castle and fight with the beast and be sad and lonely and scared and do all the things in order to get the entire world transformed. She brings everybody back to life by going on this difficult adventure. And that's what we're there for as readers. We're there for the transformation. And so as storytellers, we have to make sure that our hero earns it. Transformation is very difficult to earn. They've got to work hard to earn it. And if they work hard to earn it, it is going to be substantial and believable and satisfying at the end. So you're doing it for your reader, okay? You're doing it for your reader. I hope that's helpful, Nancy. But we as writers have a very different experience than we have as readers. And when we're writing, the need to focus on obstacles, difficulty, and all of that stuff it's so artificial. It's like that's all we're concerned with. We're just concerned with obstacles. But when you're a reader and you read a book and the story ticks off chapter by chapter, scene after scene, one obstacle after another, you don't experience it that way, do you? I mean, you experience the resilience of the hero as they keep fighting. And then you get to the incredible like fireworks of joy at the end when the transformation is accomplished. And this, of course, is true in all kinds of stories. Not every story has an overtly happy celebratory ending. Many do. Reader, I married him. I rest my case. Many of our favorite stories do have happy endings. But even if they have tragic endings, there is still this quality of like catharsis, of satisfaction, of, oh, yes, of course it had to end this way. Like there's a transformation. And, it goes in a different direction. And that's kind of a whole other topic of discussion. But it's equally satisfying to the reader if it has been earned. All right. Very good. So I'm ready to wrap up. I'm just going to do a quick pass through the comments again. Nancy says, looking at the beginning this way is helpful. And I was wondering why it was hard to come up with things to fling at my hero. All right, Nancy. So if that's the case, go make sure that you've done a sufficient job in inventing that what's true before the storytelling even begins, before the first pages start to flip by. You may find that you then have a lot to work with. And says also it's giving her a lot to think about. Yes, being the runt and living under the stairs. Yes, all of these things, plus being an orphan, plus, having a cousin that treats you so cruelly. I mean, add them up and just layer them on. It's really evident in the stories that we love how much storytelling is packed in, like compressed energy, right? Like something that's going to power its way through the whole story before we even get to page one. Yet not necessarily easy to invent, but at least you know what to be doing, and at least you have a sense of what the job is, and you can continue to look at it. And we'll end with Katie's comment: transformation has to be earned. I love it. Yes, it does, in life and in fiction, right, Katie? Change is not handed to us on a platter. Anybody who's ever gone on some substantial journey of personal development, whether achieving a new skill or trying to change the way you think or overcoming a destructive habit, I mean, that you don't just wake up one day and say, oh, I was this way, now I'll be a different way. That's not how it works. There's trial and error. There are setbacks. We think we got it, then we realize that we only have a piece of it, and we're climbing a mountain that most of the mountain was buried in the clouds. When we started the climb, we had no idea how high it truly was. And then we climb up a ways and the clouds part and we go, whoa, right? That's story structure. And we love stories. Why? Because our lives kind of work that way. It rings psychologically true. Stories are good for people. Let me end with that. Stories are really good for people. So when you do the hard work of being a storyteller, just know that you're doing something really good, something that's really good for others. It's hard work, but it's also an act of service and generosity. And let me say, as someone who's been doing this my whole life, it is a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to make stuff up. When you love stories the way we all do, and you start to see one coming to life, like before you, of your own invention, it's deeply satisfying. And there's a lot of rewards along the way, personal rewards for doing all of this hard work. So be of good cheer, but also put a real crack in the foundation of your stories. All right, guys, that's what I have for you today. Thank you so much for being here. I really loved digging into this topic with you. I appreciate your comments very, very much. Those of you who might be watching the replay, if you're not subscribed to the channel, please subscribe. If this content was a benefit to you, you can give it a little thumbs up and hit the like. That helps the channel. Just find new storytellers out there who might benefit from this content, and I would love that. And I'm going to give you one last reminder for the free download. Go over to www.pathofthestoryteller.com/challenge and just put your email address in. You'll get an email delivering this workbook to you. You can download it. It's a PDF. You can print it out. It's got 30 writing prompts that are going to, I'm not going to say trick you, but guide you into brainstorming not just random things, but the exact type of questions that you should be asking yourself from beginning to middle to end to actually develop an entire story structure. The question about what is unsustainable in your hero's world is one of the early prompts in the workbook, and it goes on from there. So I think those of you who are not used to thinking of story structures just having such specificity to it are going to learn a ton just from doing the prompts in this freebie. Okay, so please take advantage of it. Thank you again for being here, all my dear storytellers. I look forward to seeing you next week. And until then, happy writing.